This time we're going to go over Moses part 2. We're going to jump straight into it. Now, the last time, whenever we left off, we just talked briefly about how Moses took the Hebrew people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt and across the water. And that's exactly where we left off. But if you remember, I said I wanted to go back and do a little more digging and a little more diving into some of the things that happened along the way, where it is they ended up, and what research actually shows us, and what studies are still finding new, and what people are still debating about today about the whole journey. This dot isn't exactly where they came from. It's just a good representation of being in Egypt. So I've seen it this way, going a little north of that mountain range and then over the top of that waterway there. I've seen it expressed this way, and I've done research, years of reading and research about all of these different paths that Moses and the children of Israel probably took out of Egypt to get to this same location. Now, in a lot of cases, people will say the destination is not as important as the journey. And I would agree that metaphorically and spiritually, that is very true. But in this one particular case, I would actually argue that the destination is a little more important than the journey. And all three of these Exodus routes end here in this location. So that's a good thing. I personally believe that there's a mixture of the red and the green path. I'm a fan of kind of mixing the red and the green paths together to end up there. And right where Moses crossed, where we're going to study all the information today, is going to be on the green path and at the very end of the green path. And so they ended up here. And this area is actually northwest Saudi Arabia today, in today's time. So if we zoom in on that beach, on the left, we have that peninsula that's right in between Egypt and Saudi Arabia, modern day. And if we look closer at that beach, we see the words Nuweiba and Wasit. Now, what's important about this is that in Exodus 14, it states that they are bewildered in the land, and the wilderness has closed them in. Then I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them, and I will gain honor over the Pharaoh and over all of his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. And so right here, if you can see the red line that I've kind of jotted down in between the wilderness and in the mountains, as the mountains has entrapped them there, if this is the path they would have taken, the site in question, they would have ended up on that beautiful beach that has the mountains ending into the sea at the north and the south, and they wouldn't have been able to get away. But it says that they are bewildered by the land. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know where to go once they reached this point, that the wilderness has closed them in. Okay? Now, on the other side, the other site that is in question is that red square that was up, the location, the destination. Well, even if you zoom in with Google Maps, it'll tell you that in that region is considered Mount Sinai of Yahweh. And also out there is the golden calf altar. And if you zoom in even further, it'll even pull up the altar of Moses right there in between those. I guess I didn't zoom in far enough. But now let's talk about how they got there while they were walking across there. Now, the Bible also says in Exodus 13 that the Lord went before them by a pillar of a cloud to lead the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night, that he did not take away the pillar of the cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night. So every time I read that, I think about your classic supercell. And right here, and we'll talk about it in a minute, or actually later, about being under the cloud. And it says that a pillar of a cloud guided them by day. And if you remember, this is before they actually get to the sea to do the crossing. And last time we spoke about how Moses didn't just smash his rod into the sea and it didn't just split open like most movies depict. That actually it says that the Lord sent a strong east wind to blow all that night to create the division of the waters. So there are some serious weather events happening throughout this whole process. So it's not unreasonable to just give inspiration to what is described in the Bible by assigning a supercell to it or something like it that would be guiding them by day to the direction that they would need to go. Now remember that under the cloud part, because right there under that cloud of the supercell storm system, there is little to no precipitation there. By the way, all the precipitation is out there to the right where they have the possible hail, the tornadoes, all that good stuff. Now it said that he sent a pillar of fire to guide them by night. I don't know if you've ever seen a pillar of fire, so I went ahead and got one of these photos off of Google as well. But this is basically a giant fire tornado. That this stuff isn't fictional. We're talking about real life weather phenomena. And the most beautiful part is that it would be happening at the timing that it's happening is. Like in the beginning when it said that the sun and the moon would be as signs for seasons. Well, in the Hebrew, it doesn't say seasons as if it means spring, summer, fall, winter. That it's actually talking about moedim, which are appointed times, so that people would know the appointed times of the Lord, and that this is absolutely an appointed time. Now, I would think that the pillar of fire would have probably been located there on that beach in Nuweiba that we just zoomed in on, because as research finds that that entire southern part of the beach, all the tiny pebbles on the beach, and even the larger rocks that were on the beach have been fused together by an extreme heat event. That it's not concrete, it's not just one giant rock. These are actually every pebble and every rock that was located on the beach has been fused together by some type of phenomena. So if the Lord set up a pillar of a cloud by day to guide them, and a pillar of fire by night to guide them, so that they would know where to go, that this site really does provide a lot of evidence that that site in question could truly be the place. And if it's not, God knows. And the more people try to do research to prove and to disprove, that will just lead to the real evidence. It'll just lead us there. But what's awesome is, if that's the site in question and they cross there, that right across from it, even on Google Maps, is the split rock of Horeb. So let's talk about what's so important about the split rock of Horeb and what is it? Well, this is the rock of Horeb. And where all of the people started to complain and they started to become very contentious and saying, you know, why is it that you have brought us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst out here? There's nothing for us to drink. So then the Lord said to Moses, go on before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel. Also take in your hand your rod with which you struck the river. Remember, it turned into blood. And go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb. And you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink. So what they found was, this is just an illustration, obviously, of water coming out of that site. What they found at this site was actual channels were created by water coming down from that rock, down in the area just below where this picture was taken. There's a bunch of channels that were carved out by water. And they even found bigger rocks that were modified and smashed down into the channels to create offshoot channels. So there is evidence at this rock of Horeb of water coming out and channels being created by human interference. And so then the Bible says right after that, now Amalek came and fought with Israel and Rephidim. Now Amalek, this is important because Amalek is a descendant of Esau. So you remember, you have Esau and Jacob, who were brothers. One group becomes the Israelites, the other group becomes Edom, and later the Idumeans. So they're still at odds, just like the two brothers were in the womb. You can go back to our previous Bible studies and learn more about that. And now here they are. After everything they've been through, Amalek comes down and fought with Israel and Rephidim. And in Exodus 17:16, it says, because the Lord has sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Then the Bible says, but Moses, his hands became heavy. So they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and one on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And so then Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Let's remember Joshua. Then it goes on to say that in Exodus 18, and Jethro said, blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of the Pharaoh, and who has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know the Lord is greater than all the gods. So here, remember, Jethro is the high priest of Midian. So he's got all of his knowledge about his chakras and the universe and all of his gods and his cool little statues and his beads and whatever else that he believes, because he believes in all the gods, obviously, or he at least gives them some type of reading, some type of attention, as he said here. Now he's converted. He's a convert. He says, now I know the Lord is greater than all the gods, because he has seen everything that has happened to the people. Now he knows for sure that the God of miracles is Yahweh, the God of Moses, the God of Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to the people, consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day, the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. That sounds really familiar to what happens, future events of this point, when Jesus comes back on the third day in the sight of all the people. So it's very similar. For you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So right there, God is declaring that the children of Israel and the Israelites, they are a holy nation, and that they are a special treasure to God. But there's a caveat, they're also a kingdom of priests. So they're supposed to be priests teaching. What, are they going to teach themselves something that they already know? No, they're supposed to be preaching to those who don't know, to those who weren't given the information, to those who didn't go through this, just like they did with Jethro. Jethro witnessed it. They were a witness to Jethro, and he converted and realized that your God is greater than all the gods. Uh-oh, I'm having a little technical difficulty here. There we go. Exodus 19. And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain. And the sound of the trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. Again, on the third day. Exodus 20 goes on to say, an altar of earth you shall make for me, and you shall sacrifice on it burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I record my name, I will come to you and I will bless you. So in that same area on the red square of the map that we saw earlier, there is this site where God instructs them to not build the altar out of hewn stones, for surely if your tools touch it, you'll defile it, which means just don't shape the stones. Just pick up the rocks as they are and build me an altar. And as you can see there in the background, all of those stones are just regular stones. They haven't been shaped with anything. However, these three stones, these little biscuits, let's not forget the Hebrew people were sentenced to heavy work while they were in Egypt through brick and mortar. So these guys know what they're doing when it comes to building. They don't want to build some sloppy thing like that in the background where that altar is built with all these natural stones. That's not their style. They're workmen. They know how to do this. So it shows in these three stones right here, because the Lord also instructed them to build 12 pillars. Looked at 3 stones there. 12 pillars, one for each tribe of Israel. Now out here, this is all out in that same site, site that's in question, I'll say. Then Exodus 24 goes on to say, then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people, which I thought was really interesting, because the Bible that we read from is not the book that Moses held, because Moses is the one who wrote the Torah. And at this point, he hasn't gotten to that stage yet. He hasn't written the Torah in Exodus 24. So he had a book. He had a book called the Book of the Covenant, and he read it to the hearing of the people. I find that to be pretty interesting. Then the Lord said to Moses, come up to the mountain and be there, and I will give you tablets of stone and the law and the commandments which I have written, that you may teach them. So after all this, he's also given instructions to build some things and to make some items. Even given instructions on how the high priest garments should go, saying that there should be 2 stones of onyx on each shoulder, featuring the names of the sons of Israel in the order that they were born in, and also a breastplate made of all types of different stones. You need to go back and do your own reading. This is very interesting. It's very important that you do your own reading to understand whose name was on what type of stone and why. So all these spiritualists out here talking about their stones and their rocks, well, you need to understand why and where it came from, and just abandon that practice. Then we come down here to the table with the showbread. This will also be housed somewhere, and we'll get to that in a moment. This will be housed somewhere. And this actually looks very familiar to some of the practices in Christian churches today, where they do the bread and the wine on the first Sunday, or whatever Sunday your church does it on, communion, they call it, where you commune with a moment with God to remember Jesus and to raise a toast to him. But it was here first. Then there was also what we know as the Hanukkah menorah, the lampstand with the 7 candles. And this will be housed inside the same place with all of these furniture. This will be the furniture of the tabernacle. They were also given instructions how to build an altar of incense. Go back and do your reading. And this will be the Ark of the Covenant with the mercy seat on top. This is basically a big box with a really fancy lid. And whenever they sacrificed animals, the high priest would sprinkle the blood onto the mercy seat. So this is just some of the furniture and the high priest's garments that they were instructed to make with very specific instructions. So now let's see. This is where they put it, in the tabernacle. If you ever hear anybody say something about the tabernacle, this is a tabernacle. And they were given very specific instructions on how to build it. Down to the left there, you can even see that copper bowl where you're going to wash your hands, clean yourself up before you go in. There's only certain people allowed inside, and definitely only one person beyond the veil in the back, and that's the high priest. But let's go inside a little bit and see what it might look like inside of the tabernacle. Now you see the furniture there, right? You see the altar of incense straight in front of you. To the left is the Hanukkah menorah. To the right, you have the table with the showbread. And in front of you is the curtain or the veil. Only the high priest is allowed back there. If we get a little closer, you can see there's angels, pictures of angels, and this artist, I don't know how accurate they got it, but this is just to represent what the tabernacle would have looked like inside. And behind that curtain, behind that veil would have been the Ark of the Covenant. I want you to be curious and inspired to go and do some more reading about what it's all about. That's why I'm not going to break it all down right here. Exodus 31 says, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, You see, I have called by name Bezaleel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. And I have filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom, in understanding, in knowledge, and in all manners of workmanship, to design artistic works, to work in gold and silver and bronze, in cutting jewels for setting, in carving wood, and to work in all manner of workmanship." And so it's Bezaleel and Aholiab who actually do all, most, if not all, of the work, designing the furniture and by the instructions that were given, the tabernacle, menorah, everything. And then as Moses is up in the mountain, convening with the Lord, it says that the Israelites become impatient and they demand that Moses isn't coming back and that they should be made a god. Make us a god, they said. So they took off all their gold and their earrings and they found everything they could, and they decided that they were going to make this golden calf and an altar to the golden calf. Remember, that is also in this same area of the red square that was showed you on the map earlier. That they made this golden calf and they started to worship it. And that goes hand in hand with the very first letter of the Aleph Bet. The very first letter of the Aleph Bet is the ox head or the bull head, which represents God's strength. It represents the creator. It represents him being the first God. So now what they've done is they've taken this to be literal instead of metaphorical, and they have just defiled some information that has been around for a while. And they've turned it to be a real golden calf, a false deity. I also just want to add that this information spreads out with people. I'm talking about the Aleph Bet. and the paleo and the ancient images that represent these letters and their meanings and the stories that go with them. And if you follow the people spreading out from Mesopotamia out into the world, you'll even see that Hinduism, well, the god of Hinduism is Brahma, which is represented also by a bull. Okay, and that time frame is all relatively close. Whether it's a little before this time or a little bit after, this information is here already. It didn't just pop up at this moment. Okay, so it all comes from the center point. Now in Exodus 34, we see that he's given the commandments. And the Lord spoke to Moses, said, cut 2 tablets of stone like the first ones I gave you, and I will write on these tablets the words that were on the first tablets that you broke. So be ready in the morning and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai and present yourself to me there on the top of the mountain. So he's given him instructions on how to come up and get the replacements, because he was so irritated when he witnessed the golden calf situation. They broke. Whether he slammed them down or dropped them, they broke. So now he's given instructions on how to get the new ones in his possession. Then the work was finished. And on the crown of the high priest, they inscribed in Hebrew, holiness to the Lord. That should be on your mind always, as it's on your crown, the crown of your head. Holiness to the Lord should be right in front of your pineal gland, which represents the face of God. If you read about Jacob when he went to sleep with his head on that rock, you'll know that. So holiness to the Lord should always be up there on your mind, right along with the face of God. And that ends the book of Exodus. Now, the next 3 books are Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And I'm not going to do an entire Bible study on Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. However, I will just touch base that Leviticus kind of breaks down some of the very same things in a different detail. And it goes on to tell you more about the laws, like you should not lie with a male as with a woman, for it's an abomination. You should give no regard to mediums and familiar spirits like psychics and whatnot. Do not seek after them to be defiled by them, for I am the Lord your God. It even goes on to say that if a stranger dwells with you in your land, you shall not mistreat him. The stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt, and I am the Lord your God. And that is from Leviticus. And then as we get into Numbers, it starts to shed more light on the second Passover, that if a stranger dwells among you and you would keep the Lord's Passover, he must do so according to the rule of the Passover and according to its ceremony. You shall have one ordinance, both for the stranger and the native in the land. So there's nobody left out. Then it goes on to describe a little more about Caleb, which we talked about in our last Bible study. Remember, that's Numbers 14 and also Numbers 32, where it talks about Joshua and Caleb. Remember, Joshua defeated Amalek, came down to fight the Israelites about 6-7 slides ago. That Joshua, the war man, and Caleb, they go into Canaan to do some reconnaissance and to be spies. Now, there's something else that happens in Numbers. I want to talk about it real quick. That it says that they were just rebellious out there. They just kept rebelling against God. And even after everything that they witnessed, and even after everything they witnessed converted Jethro, the high priest of Midian, even he realized, wow, God is the only God, greater than all the other lowercase g gods. He's the only God. Even he knew that. But still, the Israelites decided to make different gods for themselves and worship other gods. And so the Bible says in Numbers 21 that the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people of Israel died. Then the Lord said to Moses, make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole, that it shall be there for everyone who is bitten, that when he looks on it, they shall live. And so Moses made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole. And so it was, and it was so that if a serpent had bitten anyone, that when he looked upon the bronze serpent, he lived. Now, for people that don't have faith, that's really hard to understand, because you're trying to go upon your own understanding instead of the understanding of God and the grace of miracles. But right here in this picture, you'll see the brass serpent raised up on the stick so that the people of Israel might live. Now, before I go any further, I want to just point out that they called it Nehushtan. And its date is around 1500 BC, give or take some. Now, this symbol, which you might see on ambulances, hospitals, medicine cabinets, I don't know, they call that Asclepius, which is around 800 BC. You might even have seen this before, the two snakes around the pole. They know that as Caduceus, 600 BC. Now you see which one was first, right? The Nehushtan, from the people of Israel that God told Moses to build. Everybody else is just stealing from the original point of reference. God is always first. Everything else comes next. But now in John 3:14, not everybody, but a lot of people knows what John 3:16 says. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever should believe in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Well, this is a precept to that. Because what does John 3:14 say? It says, and Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness. Even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. So the same way the serpent was raised up in the wilderness to be a sign of your faith, if you look upon it and believe, come and face your fears, right, that you will be saved. I also want to point out that at the Caduceus, that golden rod on the right there with the wings and it has two serpents and not one. If you remember back in Moses part 1, whenever they threw down the rod and it became the serpent, and there was some more information that I added on to about that the Pharaoh's magicians threw down their rods and created two serpents. So no matter which way you slice it, they're all pulling from the history of Moses and the children of Israel and their experiences. I think they call that whitewashing. 2 Kings 18. It's talking about King Hezekiah. Let's give more reference to all this stuff that's going on. This is a long distance of time after the children of Israel were in the wilderness and all this has happened. The King Hezekiah, he removed the high places and broke the sacred pillars. Remember those 12 pillars made out of those biscuit stones that I showed you up there a couple slides ago? Those pillars, that he removed the high places. He broke the sacred pillars. He cut down the wooden image and broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. For until those days, the children of Israel were burning incense to it, and they called it Nehushtan. So even after all that, they started worshiping that snake on the cross or on the rod that was raised up out there, because they just lost spiritually, lost physically. And Hezekiah went out there to prove a point that not even something that you hold dear to your heritage is important enough for you to lose your soul. So we're going to destroy all of that. It doesn't need to be here anymore. In the same way, some people march into modern churches today and they burn incense in front of the golden cross with Jesus on it. You don't do that. Pray to God, go to God. And I'm sure there will be a modern day Hezekiah to raise up one day, a modern day Joshua. And they'll break all of those things because God is not a changing God and God is a jealous God. Let's go to 1 Corinthians. Let's wrap it up. 1 Corinthians, verse 10 says, "Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud. All of them passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ." We're talking quantum physics here. We're talking natural phenomenons and miracles. Things that only God can perform and only God can explain. And there we go. I was about to say, I know I had a final verse here in Deuteronomy 34. Let's go there real quick. Get my Bible back open. I'm a little off my game today. I'll go ahead and admit it. Deuteronomy 34 says, "So Moses went up from the plains of Moab into Mount Nebo, and the Lord showed him all the land of Gilead as far as Dan, all of Naphtali and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, and all of the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of the palm trees as far as Zoar. And then the Lord said to him, This is the land of which I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And so Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite of Beth Peor. But no one knows to this day where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not dim, nor his natural vigor diminished. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days. And that ends Moses part 2.